The Galactic Council chamber buzzed with the usual mixture of languages, each species contributing their own particular brand of arrogance to the cosmic symphony. Ambassador Zethkri of the Valerian Empire adjusted his crystalline breathing apparatus and gazed down at the newest applicant with undisguised contempt. The human delegation sat in the lower gallery, their primitive cloth uniforms a stark contrast to the energy-woven garments and biomechanical enhancements worn by the established members. "Earth wishes to join our alliance?" Zethkri's voice resonated through the translation matrix, carrying notes of amusement that needed no interpretation. "Tell us, humans, what could your backward world possibly offer the most advanced civilizations in the galaxy?" Captain Sarachan stood slowly, her weathered hands clasped behind her back in a gesture that spoke of military discipline. Her gray hair was pulled back in a simple bun, and her uniform bore the scars of countless battles fought in humanity's recent expansion into space. She had volunteered for this mission knowing full well it would likely end in humiliation, but someone had to represent Earth's interests. "We offer our experience, our determination, and our willingness to defend what we believe in," she replied steadily. The chamber erupted in what could generously be called laughter. The Thylorian representative, a being of pure energy contained within a magnetic field, flickered with patterns that indicated extreme mirth. The Korthan delegate, whose species had mastered matter manipulation millennia ago, actually slapped his knee with a hand that briefly became liquid before solidifying again. "Defense," wheezed the Valerian ambassador. "With what? We've studied your technology. Kinetic projectiles fired from chemical explosives? Metal tubes that accelerate small pieces of matter? You might as well be throwing rocks." Captain Chen felt the familiar weight of the sidearm at her hip. A simple .45 caliber pistol, manufactured on Earth using techniques that hadn't changed fundamentally in over 2 centuries. It was nothing compared to the plasma cannons, quantum disruptors, and molecular scramblers that these beings wielded. Yet something in her military training rebelled against the casual dismissal. "Perhaps," she said quietly, "but these weapons have served us well in our conflicts." "Conflicts?" The Solarian delegate leaned forward, her 6 arms gesturing expressively. "What conflicts could possibly prepare you for galactic warfare? Your entire species hasn't even left your home system in meaningful numbers." Captain Chen's jaw tightened. These beings had no idea what humanity had endured to reach this point. The resource wars of the early 22nd century, when nations had fought desperately over dwindling supplies. The Lunar Rebellion, where Earth's first off-world colony had declared independence and fought a brutal 3-year campaign in the low-gravity environment. The asteroid mining disputes that had led to running battles in the vacuum of space, where one mistake meant death for everyone aboard a ship. "We've had our share of learning experiences," she replied diplomatically. The truth was that humanity had clawed its way into space through sheer stubborn determination. While other species had apparently developed faster-than-light travel through elegant manipulation of spacetime or transcendence to higher dimensional planes, humans had simply built bigger rockets and stronger hulls. Their first interstellar ship had been little more than a massive fusion engine attached to a spinning habitat module, taking nearly 40 years to reach the nearest star system. But they had made it. And, when they encountered the automated probe networks that the galactic civilizations used to monitor primitive species, humanity had done something unexpected. Instead of sending mathematical proofs or artistic expressions to demonstrate their intelligence, they had sent a simple message: "We're here. We're armed. We mean no harm, but we're ready to defend ourselves." The probe had transmitted this message back to the Galactic Council, along with detailed scans of human technology. The Council had reviewed the data with the kind of bemused tolerance typically reserved for particularly clever pets. Chemical rockets, nuclear fission, crude electromagnetic communications, and, most amusing of all, weapons that relied on accelerating small metal projectiles through controlled chemical explosions. It was this last detail that had generated the most entertainment among the council members. Some species had evolved beyond the need for physical forms, existing as pure consciousness within quantum matrices. Others had developed biotechnology that could reshape matter at the molecular level, creating weapons that could literally rewrite the atomic structure of their targets. A few had mastered temporal manipulation, able to age their enemies to dust or trap them in causality loops. And here were the humans, still pointing metal tubes at each other and making things go bang. "Your weapons are indeed primitive," declared the Thylorian representative, his energy form pulsing with what might have been condescension. "Our quantum disruptors can unmake matter at the subatomic level. The Valorians can project plasma streams that burn at stellar temperatures. But Korthans can phase shift their projectiles through multiple dimensions simultaneously. What could your guns possibly accomplish against such technology? Captain Chen looked around the chamber, noting the casual arrogance on every visible face and the equivalent emotional emanations from the non-corporeal species. These beings had clearly never faced a truly determined opponent. Their wars, if they still fought them at all, were probably elegant affairs of advanced technology and sophisticated strategy. They had likely forgotten what it meant to fight with your back against the wall, using whatever tools you could find. I suppose, she said carefully, that depends on the circumstances. The Solarian delegate waved dismissively with three of her arms. There are no circumstances where primitive kinetic weapons would be effective against modern defensive systems. Our personal shields can deflect particle beams and absorb energy attacks. Our armor can adapt to incoming threats in real time. Your bullets would simply bounce off. Would they? Captain Chen asked, her voice taking on a note that made several of the military attaches in the gallery sit up straighter. Of course. The Korthan representative shaped his malleable hand into what was presumably meant to be a gun, complete with an extended finger as a barrel. Bang, bang. But our defenses were designed by species with millions of years of technological advancement. We have considered every possible attack vector. Captain Chen nodded slowly. Every possible attack vector from advanced species using advanced technology. Exactly. The Valerian ambassador's crystalline face somehow managed to convey smugness. Your primitive projectiles are beneath consideration. They exist so far down the technological spectrum that our defensive systems don't even register them as threats. There was something in the way he said it that made Captain Chen pause. A memory surfaced from her early military training, when an old sergeant had taught her about the evolution of warfare. How the most advanced fortifications in history had sometimes fallen to the simplest tactics. How sophisticated enemies often overlooked basic threats because they were focused on countering other sophisticated enemies. I see, she said quietly. So your shields and armor are designed to stop advanced weapons. The most advanced in the galaxy, confirmed the Thylaurian proudly. And they've been tested against plasma cannons, quantum disruptors, molecular scramblers, and similar high-tech weapons. Extensively, agreed the Solarian. But never against something as primitive as a simple kinetic projectile. The chamber fell silent for a moment as the implications of what she was suggesting began to filter through various neural networks, quantum consciousnesses, and hive minds. The Valerian ambassador was the first to recover his composure. Are you seriously suggesting that our defenses, which can withstand stellar-level energy outputs and matter-disrupting attacks, would somehow be vulnerable to a small piece of metal moving at chemical propellant velocities? I'm not suggesting anything, Captain Chen replied mildly. I'm simply noting that most defensive systems are designed to counter the threats their creators can imagine. Preposterous. The Korthan delegate's form briefly became more angular, indicating agitation. Basic physics applies regardless of technological level. A primitive projectile cannot penetrate advanced armor. Basic physics, Captain Chen agreed. Like momentum transfer, penetration dynamics, and the fact that kinetic energy increases with velocity squared. The silence stretched longer this time. Several of the delegates began accessing their respective databases, quantum linking to their homeworld's research networks, or consulting with their military advisors through whatever communication methods their species employed. You're talking about museum pieces, the Solarian finally said, but her voice had lost some of its earlier confidence. Antiques from a species that hasn't even mastered basic energy manipulation. Sometimes, Captain Chen said, her hand resting casually on her sidearm, the old ways work because they're simple, reliable, and unexpected. The Thylaurian representative flickered through several color patterns before stabilizing. Even if, hypothetically, there was some flaw in our defensive calculations, your weapons would still be limited by their primitive delivery systems. Our ships can engage at ranges measured in planetary diameters. Our fighters can phase between dimensions. Our ground forces can teleport across continents. How would you even get close enough to use these theoretical primitive weapons? Captain Chen smiled for the first time since entering the chamber. It wasn't a particularly pleasant expression. Admiral Martinez, would you care to answer that? A second human stood up from the delegation. Admiral Carlos Martinez had commanded Earth's defense during the Outer Colony crisis, when separatist forces had attempted to use asteroid-based mass drivers against the home world. His left arm was a cybernetic replacement, lost during a boarding action on a rebel mining platform. His face bore the kind of scars that came from fighting in damaged ships where the life support was failing. "The thing about humans," he said in a gravelly voice that had commanded fleets through the vacuum of space, "is that we've been fighting each other for so long that we've gotten very, very good at finding ways to kill things that are trying to kill us." The delegates shifted uncomfortably. There was something in the Admiral's tone that suggested he wasn't speaking theoretically. "Take stealth, for example," Martinez continued conversationally. "You've all developed very sophisticated sensor networks designed to detect the energy signatures of advanced propulsion systems, quantum fluctuations from dimensional drives, and thermal emissions from high-tech life support. Very impressive." He paused, letting that sink in. "But a human ship running on chemical rockets, with minimal electronic emissions and crew trained to operate in near-freezing temperatures to reduce thermal signature, that's not sophisticated enough to register as a threat on most of your sensors. It's like using radar to detect a wooden arrow." The chamber was now completely silent. Several delegates were frantically communicating with their home worlds, requesting immediate analysis of their defensive protocols. "Or consider boarding actions," the Admiral said, warming to his subject. "Your species have developed elegant solutions like matter transporters, quantum tunneling, and dimensional gateways. Very advanced. Very predictable. Your ship's defensive systems are designed to detect and counter these sophisticated infiltration methods." His cybernetic hand opened and closed with a faint whirring sound. "But what if someone just uses a simple cutting torch to burn through your hull and climbs inside? What if they bypass all your quantum locks and electronic countermeasures by simply using shaped charges to blow holes in your walls? Your computers aren't programmed to expect someone to walk up to your door and kick it down." The Valerian ambassador's crystalline features had taken on a distinctly alarmed hue. "This is barbaric. Uncivilized. Modern warfare is conducted according to certain protocols." "Protocols," Captain Chen repeated thoughtfully. "Like rules of engagement that assume all participants are using comparable technology levels and similar tactical doctrines." "Exactly." The Solarian delegate's relief was palpable. "There are accepted standards of conflict in civilized space. Challenges are issued formally, with agreed-upon weapons and predetermined victory conditions. Wars are fought with honor and respect for opponent capabilities." Admiral Martinez and Captain Chen exchanged glances. The Admiral's scarred face twisted into what might charitably be called a grin. "Ma'am," he said formally, "I believe we've just identified the problem." "Indeed," Captain Chen replied. "These people have forgotten how to fight a war." The chamber erupted into protests and indignant queries. The Thylorian representative flickered so rapidly he appeared to be strobing. The Corthan delegate began shifting through forms so quickly that he temporarily resembled abstract art. The Solarian's 6 arms gestured wildly in what was presumably her species' equivalent of outrage. But, underneath the noise, there was something else. A growing unease as the assembled delegates began to truly consider what these two humans had just told them. Their defenses were designed to stop advanced weapons. Their sensors were calibrated to detect sophisticated technology. Their tactical doctrines assumed civilized opponents who would follow established rules of engagement. And humanity apparently did none of those things. Captain Chen raised her hand for silence, and, surprisingly, got it. "Perhaps," she said into the sudden quiet, "we should discuss what Earth can offer the Galactic Council in terms of security consultation." The Valerian ambassador's voice came out as little more than a whisper. "You're suggesting that your primitive weapons and barbaric tactics could actually be effective?" "I'm suggesting," Captain Chen replied calmly, "that sometimes the best defense against sophisticated enemies is an ally who fights dirty." The silence that followed was the sound of an entire galactic civilization suddenly realizing they might have made a very, very serious miscalculation. 3 weeks after the disastrous first contact meeting, the Galactic Council found itself facing an unprecedented crisis. The Void Hunters had returned. For over 2,000 years, the Void Hunters had remained in the dark spaces between galaxies, content to observe and occasionally harvest small, isolated worlds for reasons that remained mysterious. They were a species that had transcended physical form millions of years ago, existing as pure malevolent consciousness within ships that seemed to bend reality around them. When they moved, space itself appeared to writhe and twist. When they attacked, they didn't simply destroy their targets, they erased them from existence so completely that even quantum echoes ceased to exist. The Council's first warning came from the Outer Rim monitoring stations. Massive gravitational anomalies were detected moving at impossible speeds toward the galactic core. Reality distortions followed in their wake, leaving empty spaces where star systems had once existed. The Void Hunters weren't just attacking, they were consuming entire solar systems, converting matter and energy into fuel for their incomprehensible technology. Emergency sessions were called. Ancient defense protocols were activated. The combined fleets of a dozen species prepared for what every tactical analysis indicated would be a hopeless battle. The Valorians deployed their most advanced plasma projectors, weapons that could theoretically ignite gas giants and turn them into miniature stars. The Thylorians manifested their consciousness into pure energy constructs capable of existing in multiple dimensions simultaneously. The Corthans shaped their matter manipulation technology into weapons that could rewrite the fundamental laws of physics within localized areas. And, then, they engaged the Void Hunters at the Battle of Kepler Station. The results were catastrophic. The Void Hunters' ships didn't simply resist the Council's weapons, they absorbed them. Plasma streams that could melt asteroids were drawn into the alien vessels like water into a sponge. Quantum disruptors that could unmake matter at the subatomic level simply ceased to function when they came within range of the enemy. Matter manipulation attacks were reversed and turned back on their creators. Worse still, the Void Hunters seemed to learn from each attack. Their defensive capabilities adapted in real time, becoming more effective against each weapon type as the battle progressed. Within hours, the most sophisticated arsenal in galactic history had become completely useless. The Council fleet retreated in chaos, leaving behind nearly 40% of their ships and an unknown number of crew members who had been absorbed along with their vessels. The Void Hunters continued their advance toward the galactic core, consuming everything in their path. In the emergency bunker beneath the Council chambers, panic reigned supreme. Delegates who had spent millennia believing in their technological superiority now faced an enemy that rendered their advantages meaningless. Desperate proposals were made, some suggested abandoning the galaxy entirely, others recommended attempting to negotiate with beings that had never shown interest in communication. It was the Solarian delegate who first voiced what everyone was thinking but no one wanted to say. What about the humans? The suggestion was met with horrified silence. These were the same beings whose primitive weapons had been mocked just weeks earlier. The species whose backward technology had been dismissed as museum pieces. The representatives of a world that hadn't even mastered basic energy manipulation. They're primitives, the Valerian ambassador protested, though his crystalline voice lacked its earlier conviction. Their weapons couldn't possibly be effective where ours have failed. Their weapons, the Thylorian representative flickered nervously, are so primitive that they might not register on the Void Hunters' adaptive systems. Admiral Martinez and Captain Chen had remained on the Council station as observers, their official application for membership having been tabled indefinitely. When the emergency summons reached them, they responded with the grim professionalism of soldiers who had seen too much warfare to be surprised by anything. "You want our help," Admiral Martinez said without preamble as he entered the bunker. It wasn't a question. The assembled delegates shifted uncomfortably. These beings who had commanded star-spanning empires and wielded technology that could reshape matter at will were now reduced to asking for assistance from what they had recently considered a backward species. "The Void Hunters have proven resistant to our conventional weapons," the Corthan representative said carefully. "We thought perhaps your alternative approaches might provide options we haven't considered." Captain Chen studied the tactical displays showing the enemy advance. The Void Hunter ships were massive, irregular constructs that seemed to exist partially outside normal spacetime. They moved in formations that followed no recognizable pattern, and their behavior suggested an intelligence that operated on principles completely alien to standard military doctrine. "What have you tried?" she asked. The next hour was spent reviewing the failed engagement at Kepler Station. The humans listened without comment as the Council delegates described how their most advanced weapons had been absorbed, adapted to, or simply nullified. They watched tactical recordings of ships that had simply ceased to exist when caught in the Void Hunters' reality distortion fields. When the briefing concluded, Admiral Martinez was quiet for several minutes. Finally, he looked up from the displays. "You've been fighting these things like they're ships," he said. "They are ships," the Valerian ambassador replied with strained patience. "No," the admiral shook his head. They're entities that happen to be using ship-like constructs as their interface with our reality. You've been trying to destroy the constructs instead of affecting the entities themselves. The distinction seemed lost on most of the delegates, but Captain Chen was nodding slowly. It's like trying to kill someone by shooting at their shadow, she said. You're not engaging the actual target. Even if that analysis is correct, the Solarian delegate interjected, how does that help us? Your primitive weapons are even less capable of affecting transdimensional entities than our advanced systems. Captain Chen smiled grimly. Maybe. Or maybe our weapons are simple enough to actually reach the entities instead of being absorbed by their technological interfaces. She drew her sidearm, a battered .45 that had seen action in a dozen conflicts. The assembled delegates stared at the primitive weapon as if it were a museum curiosity, which in many ways it was. This fires a 230-grain bullet at roughly 800 feet per second, she explained matter-of-factly. Total kinetic energy of about 356 foot-pounds. By your standards, it's barely a step above throwing rocks. Exactly, the Thylorian representative flickered in what might have been confusion. How could such a primitive projectile affect beings that exist partially outside normal space? Because, Admiral Martinez said, it doesn't rely on any advanced technology that can be adapted to or absorbed. It's just a chunk of metal moving in a straight line according to basic Newtonian physics. No energy signatures to detect, no quantum fluctuations to counter, no complex systems to subvert. The Admiral pulled up the tactical recordings from the Kepler battle and began highlighting specific moments. Look at how they countered your attacks. Plasma streams were absorbed and redirected. Quantum weapons were nullified by manipulating their fundamental operating principles. Matter manipulation attacks were reversed by superior control systems. He paused the recording at a moment when a Void Hunter ship had phased partially out of normal space to avoid a quantum torpedo. But notice what they didn't do. They didn't phase out completely. They maintained just enough presence in our reality to interact with your ships. That suggests they can't fully disconnect from normal spacetime while engaging targets in our dimension. Captain Chen was studying the same footage with the eye of someone who had spent decades analyzing enemy capabilities. They're vulnerable, she said slowly. Not to your advanced weapons, because those can be countered. But to something too simple to be worth countering. The implications of what they were suggesting began to filter through the assembled delegates. The Void Hunters had spent eons developing defenses against sophisticated enemies using advanced technology. They had learned to absorb energy weapons, neutralize quantum effects, and reverse matter manipulation. Their adaptive systems were designed to counter the most sophisticated attacks imaginable. But what if the attack wasn't sophisticated at all? You're proposing to fight transdimensional entities with chemical propellant firearms, the Valerian ambassador said in disbelief. Among other things, Admiral Martinez replied. But first, we need to test the theory. The test came sooner than anyone expected. A Void Hunter scout ship appeared at the edge of the system, its reality-distorting presence immediately detected by the Council's monitoring systems. Emergency alerts sounded throughout the station as defensive systems came online. Captain Chen was already moving toward the docking bay where a small human transport ship waited. The vessel was typical of Earth's spacefleet, essentially a fusion-powered cargo hauler with minimal electronics and heavy armor plating. It looked primitive compared to the sleek Council ships with their energy-manipulated hulls and quantum navigation systems. What are you doing? The Solarian delegate called as the humans prepared to depart. Field testing, Admiral Martinez replied grimly as he checked his own sidearm, a compact railgun that used magnetic coils to accelerate tungsten slugs to hypersonic velocities. If we're wrong, you'll know in about 20 minutes. And, if you're right? Captain Chen paused at the airlock. Then, we're going to need a lot more ammunition. The human transport launched without fanfare, its chemical thrusters providing a steady but unimpressive acceleration toward the Void Hunter scout. Council sensors tracked both vessels, recording everything for later analysis. The Void Hunter ship was a writhing mass of dark matter that seemed to bend light around it. As the human transport approached, the alien vessel began its standard response pattern. Reality distortions rippled outward, designed to disrupt any approaching technology. The human ship flew straight through the distortions without effect. Its simple systems were too basic to be disrupted by effects designed to counter advanced technology. At a range of 10 kilometers, Captain Chen ordered the transport to come to a relative stop. The Void Hunter scout seemed to pause as well, perhaps confused by prey that wasn't fleeing or attacking with expected weapons. Transponder active, Captain Chen reported over the comm system. If this works, every council ship in the system will be able to track our position. She opened the transport's cargo bay, revealing herself in a simple pressure suit with a jetpack. In her hands was her .45 pistol, modified with a longer barrel and scope for vacuum use. The sight of a human floating in open space, pointing a primitive firearm at a ship that had just shrugged off the Council's most advanced weapons, would have been comical under other circumstances. Several delegates watching from the station actually wondered if the stress of the situation had caused the humans to suffer some form of collective breakdown. Captain Chen aimed carefully and fired. The bullet traveled the 10 kilometers between her position and the Void Hunter scout in complete silence. It was a simple chunk of lead and copper moving at roughly 800 feet per second, utterly primitive by galactic standards. It struck the alien ship's hull. And the Void Hunter scout exploded. Not the elegant energy dispersal of a ship whose power systems had been overwhelmed, or the reality-warping collapse of something caught in a dimensional effect. The scout simply came apart like any physical object struck by sufficient kinetic force, its alien materials scattering into space according to basic laws of momentum and inertia. The Council station sensors recorded everything in perfect detail. The impact point, the energy transfer, the debris pattern, all of it followed standard physics models that any first-year engineering student could have predicted. The Void Hunter scout, which had been impervious to plasma cannons and quantum disruptors, had been destroyed by what amounted to a museum piece. The silence on the communication channels was deafening. Finally, Admiral Martinez's voice crackled through the static. "Control, this is Martinez. Target neutralized. Request permission to return to base." "Permission granted," came the shaky reply from the Thylorian communications officer. As the human transport began its return journey, Captain Chen's voice came over the open channel. "Council command, we need to talk." The news of the scout's destruction spread through the council chambers like wildfire through dry grass. Within hours, every major species in the Galactic Alliance was demanding detailed reports, tactical analyses, and immediate strategic reassessments. The impossible had happened. A single human with a primitive kinetic weapon had accomplished what entire fleets of advanced ships had failed to do. The emergency council session that followed was unlike anything in the organization's 1,000-year history. Delegates who had dismissed humanity as backward savages now hung on every word from Captain Chen and Admiral Martinez. The humans found themselves transformed from supplicants seeking membership to the most important military advisors in galactic space. "Explain to us exactly how this is possible," demanded the Valerian ambassador, his crystalline features flickering with patterns that indicated extreme agitation. "Our sensors confirmed that the scout was protected by the same reality distortion fields that deflected our weapons. How did a simple projectile penetrate those defenses?" Captain Chen had spent the past several hours reviewing the combat footage and comparing it with Council data on Void Hunter technology. Her conclusion was both elegantly simple and terrifyingly profound. "Your weapons were too sophisticated," she said bluntly. "The Void Hunter's defensive systems are designed to detect and counter advanced energy signatures, quantum fluctuations, and exotic matter interactions. They've been fighting advanced civilizations for millions of years, and they've learned to neutralize everything those civilizations can throw at them." Admiral Martinez pulled up a holographic display showing the energy patterns from the failed Council attacks. "Look at these readings. Every weapon you used generated massive electromagnetic signatures, quantum disturbances, and exotic particle emissions. The Void Hunter ships detected these signatures and adapted their defenses accordingly." He switched the display to show the moment when Captain Chen's bullet struck the scout. "Now look at this. No energy signature beyond normal kinetic motion. No quantum disturbances. No exotic particles. Just a small mass moving in a straight line according to basic Newtonian physics." The implications were staggering. The Solarian delegate's 6 arms gestured frantically as she processed the data. "You're saying they can't defend against primitive attacks because they're too primitive to register as threats?" "Not exactly," Captain Chen corrected. "They register as threats, but they're too simple for the adaptive defenses to counter. It's like trying to use a quantum computer to solve the problem of someone throwing a rock at you. The computer is incredibly advanced, but the rock doesn't care about quantum mechanics. The Corthan representative, whose form had been shifting anxiously through various geometric shapes, suddenly stabilized into a rigid crystalline structure. If this is true, then our entire military doctrine is fundamentally flawed. We've been preparing to fight enemies who think like us, who use technology comparable to ours. Worse than that, Admiral Martinez said grimly. You've been preparing to fight civilized enemies. The Void Hunters aren't civilized. They're apex predators who've had millions of years to perfect their hunting techniques against the most advanced prey in the universe. The chamber fell silent as the full scope of the problem became clear. Every species in the Council had spent millennia advancing their technology, believing that greater sophistication meant greater capability. They had created weapons of incredible power and elegance, defensive systems that could counter any conceivable threat, and tactical doctrines based on the assumption that their enemies would fight according to recognizable patterns. The Void Hunters had evolved specifically to counter that approach. So what do you recommend? Asked the Thylorian representative, his energy pattern subdued and anxious. Captain Chen and Admiral Martinez exchanged glances. They had spent the hours since the Scouts' destruction developing a strategy that would have been unthinkable just days earlier. We need to revert your entire military to primitive technology, Captain Chen said. Not as a permanent solution, but as a stopgap measure while we figure out how to make your advanced systems effective again. The protests came immediately and from every direction. Delegates who had spent lifetimes mastering the intricacies of quantum warfare and energy manipulation were being told to abandon everything they had learned in favor of what they considered Stone Age tactics. This is insane, the Valerian ambassador declared. You want us to fight with chemical explosives and kinetic projectiles? We might as well be using clubs and stones. If clubs and stones would work, I'd recommend those too, Admiral Martinez replied without humor. Right now, the Void Hunters are advancing through the Outer Rim at an accelerating pace. Every hour we spend debating technological philosophy is another solar system that gets consumed. He activated a tactical display showing the enemy's current position and projected advance. The red markers indicating Void Hunter forces were moving steadily inward, leaving empty space behind them. At their current rate of advance, they would reach the Council's core worlds within 6 months. We don't have time for elegant solutions, Captain Chen added. We need to hit them with everything we've got, and, right now, everything we've got is apparently bullets and bombs. The next 12 hours were organized chaos as the Council's military leadership attempted to rapidly redesign their entire approach to warfare. Species that hadn't used physical projectiles in millennia began frantically manufacturing crude kinetic weapons. Engineers who specialized in quantum mechanics found themselves studying gunpowder chemistry. Admirals who commanded fleets of energy-manipulated vessels tried to wrap their minds around the tactical implications of ships that moved by burning chemical fuel. The humans found themselves in the unprecedented position of being the galaxy's leading military experts. Admiral Martinez was appointed as overall strategic coordinator, while Captain Chen took charge of weapons development and tactical training. Earth's small fleet was recalled from exploration duties and began serving as templates for rapid military conversion. The first engagement of the new doctrine took place at the Helix Nebula, where a Void Hunter battle group had been detected moving toward a cluster of inhabited systems. The Council fleet that met them bore little resemblance to the elegant formations that had fought at Kepler Station. Valerian ships that had once projected elegant streams of controlled plasma now mounted massive railguns that fired tungsten slugs at significant fractions of light speed. Thylorian energy beings had learned to possess mechanical targeting systems, abandoning their quantum manipulation abilities in favor of precise ballistic calculations. Corthan vessels that could reshape matter at will now carried chemical explosive warheads that relied on nothing more sophisticated than molecular bonds and rapid oxidation. The human contingent led the formation in ships that were barely more advanced than chemical-fueled cargo haulers. Their weapons were simple kinetic launchers and nuclear missiles, technology that most Council species had abandoned thousands of years earlier. Admiral Martinez commanded from the bridge of the UES Determination, a heavy cruiser that had been hastily retrofitted with the most powerful conventional weapons Earth could manufacture. Captain Chen coordinated the fighter squadrons, small craft that relied on chemical thrusters and carried pilots armed with high-velocity projectile weapons. All ships, Admiral Martinez broadcast as the fleets closed to engagement range, remember the tactical briefing. The enemy will attempt to absorb or redirect energy-based attacks. Our kinetic weapons should be immune to these countermeasures, but we don't know what other defensive capabilities they might have. Engage targets of opportunity and prepare for close-range combat. The Void Hunter battle group was unlike anything in the tactical databases. Instead of the sleek scout that Captain Chen had destroyed, these were massive constructs that seemed to exist partially outside normal spacetime. They moved with predatory grace, reality bending around them in ways that made tracking difficult. But they approached the Council fleet with the same casual confidence they had shown at Kepler Station. Their tactics were clearly based on the assumption that they faced another advanced civilization using predictable weapons and strategies. The first salvo changed everything. A dozen Valerian railgun rounds struck the lead Void Hunter vessel simultaneously. Each projectile was nothing more than a dense metal slug accelerated to extreme velocity by magnetic fields, primitive by galactic standards but carrying enormous kinetic energy. The Void Hunter ship's reality distortion fields flickered and twisted, attempting to deflect or absorb the incoming projectiles. But there was nothing to deflect or absorb. The slugs were simply chunks of matter obeying Newton's laws of motion. When they struck the alien vessel, they transferred their kinetic energy in the most basic way possible, through collision and deformation. The effect was devastating. The Void Hunter ship buckled and twisted as tungsten slugs punched through its hull at hypersonic velocities. Its reality distortion fields collapsed as the entity within was forced to focus on maintaining cohesion rather than projecting defensive effects. "Target damaged but still functional," reported the Valerian gunnery officer, his voice filled with amazement. Preparing second salvo. Across the battlefield, similar scenes played out as the Council's improvised fleet engaged with weapons that hadn't been used in galactic warfare for millennia. Phylorian-guided torpedoes carrying chemical explosives struck Void Hunter vessels and detonated in brilliant flashes of expanding gas and shrapnel. Corthan ships launched clouds of kinetic interceptors, essentially space-based shotgun shells, that riddled enemy hulls with thousands of small impacts. The human contingent focused on the largest Void Hunter vessel, a cathedral-sized construct that seemed to be coordinating the enemy formation. Captain Chen led her fighter squadron in a close-approach attack, her pilots armed with modified assault rifles and shoulder-mounted rocket launchers. The sight of tiny human fighters swooping around a reality-distorting alien dreadnought like angry insects should have been absurd. Instead, it was terrifyingly effective. The Void Hunter ship's defensive systems, designed to counter sophisticated attacks from powerful vessels, were completely unprepared for individual pilots firing single-shot projectiles at point-blank range. "This is Chen 1, Captain Chen reported as her fighter danced between probability distortions that could have unraveled the quantum structure of an advanced ship. "I'm seeing structural damage where the kinetic rounds are hitting. These things aren't as invulnerable as we thought." She lined up her sights on what appeared to be a critical junction in the alien vessel's hull and squeezed the trigger of her modified rifle. The bullet, a simple copper-jacketed projectile moving at subsonic velocity, struck the target with a small puff of vaporized metal. The entire Void Hunter dreadnought convulsed. Whatever the bullet had hit, it was apparently crucial to the entity's ability to maintain its physical form. Cracks of normal spacetime began spreading across the alien hull as the reality distortions became unstable. "All fighters, concentrate fire on the junction points," Captain Chen ordered. "These things have vulnerabilities, we just need to find them." The battle that followed was unlike anything in galactic military history. Sophisticated entities that had consumed entire star systems found themselves being slowly dismantled by weapons that belonged in museums. Their adaptive defenses, honed by millions of years of evolution, proved useless against attacks that were too simple to adapt to. But the Void Hunters were learning. As the engagement progressed, their tactics began to shift. Instead of relying on technological countermeasures, they started using their reality manipulation abilities for direct attacks. Space itself began to twist and fold, creating gravity wells and dimensional rifts designed to crush or scatter the Council fleet. "They're adapting to our tactics," Admiral Martinez observed as his ship shook under the stress of a localized spacetime distortion. "Switching from defensive to offensive reality manipulation." "Can our ships handle it?" asked the Valerian fleet commander over the communication channel. The admiral checked his damage reports. The human ships, built with simple but robust engineering, were holding together reasonably well. The Council vessels, designed for more elegant forms of warfare, were showing stress fractures as their sophisticated systems struggled to cope with fundamental alterations to local physics. "Some of us can," he replied. "But we need to end this quickly before they figure out how to use the reality manipulation more effectively." The solution came from an unexpected source. The Corthan engineering team, working with human technicians, had been studying the wreckage of destroyed Void Hunter vessels. Their analysis revealed something crucial: the aliens' reality manipulation abilities were tied to specific control nodes within their ships. Destroy the nodes, and the entity's ability to affect local spacetime was severely limited. "It's like cutting the strings on a puppet," explained the Corthan chief engineer. "The puppet can still move, but it can't dance." The information was rapidly distributed to the entire fleet. Within minutes, every ship was targeting the newly identified weak points with their primitive but effective kinetic weapons. The result was a sudden and dramatic shift in the battle's momentum. As Void Hunter vessels lost their reality manipulation capabilities one by one, they became vulnerable to conventional tactics. Without their dimensional shields and probability distortions, they were revealed to be powerful but ultimately physical constructs that could be damaged and destroyed like any other ship. The battle ended with the complete destruction of the Void Hunter battle group. For the first time since their return to galactic space, the ancient predators had been decisively defeated. In the aftermath, as rescue ships collected survivors and salvage teams examined the wreckage, the true scope of what had happened began to sink in. The most advanced military alliance in galactic history had been saved by weapons and tactics that were literally prehistoric by their standards. Admiral Martinez stood on the bridge of his battered cruiser, looking out at the debris field that marked the battlefield. Captain Shen joined him, her flight suit still scorched from the close-range fighting. "Think they'll remember this lesson?" she asked. The Admiral considered the question seriously. "For a while. But give them a few generations, and they'll probably go back to believing that more advanced automatically means more effective." Captain Chen nodded. "Well, at least we'll have membership in the council. Assuming there's still a council after we finish dealing with the rest of the Void Hunters." They stood in comfortable silence, watching as human and alien ships worked side by side to clear the battlefield. It was a sight that would have been unimaginable just weeks earlier: primitive Earth vessels directing the operations of species that had mastered technologies beyond human understanding. But, sometimes, the Admiral reflected, the old ways worked precisely because they were old, simple, and reliable. In a universe full of sophisticated predators, there was something to be said for being the species that still knew how to throw rocks. 6 months after the Battle of Helix Nebula, the war against the Void Hunters had evolved into something no military theorist in galactic history could have predicted. The most advanced civilizations in the universe were waging campaign after campaign using weapons that their ancestors had abandoned millennia ago, and winning. General Sarah Chen, recently promoted after her tactical innovations had saved 3 star systems, stood in the command center of Forward Base Olympus, a massive military installation built in the orbit of a dead world near the galactic rim. The base itself was a testament to the new reality of warfare: sophisticated council construction techniques supporting weapons emplacements that looked like they belonged on a primitive world. Massive railgun batteries, their magnetic acceleration coils powered by Thylorian energy matrices, dominated the station's defensive perimeter. Valorian manufactured kinetic missiles filled launch tubes that had been designed using human engineering principles. Corthan-shaped armor plating protected systems that relied on chemical explosives and ballistic trajectiles. "Status report," General Chen requested as she reviewed the tactical displays showing the current state of the war. Commander Rodriguez, one of the human officers who had become specialists in primitive warfare tactics, gestured to the strategic map. "The Void Hunters have adapted to our initial successes, but not in the way we expected. Instead of developing counters to kinetic weapons, they've started avoiding direct confrontation entirely." The map showed a complex pattern of enemy movements throughout the Outer Rim territories. Instead of the straightforward advance that had characterized their initial assault, the Void Hunters were now employing hit-and-run tactics, striking isolated systems and withdrawing before Council forces could respond. "They're learning," observed Admiral Martinez, who had been appointed as overall commander of the Joint Fleet. "But they're learning the wrong lessons. They think we're just another advanced species that happens to use primitive weapons. Whereas we're actually a primitive species that's learned to use advanced logistics," General Chen replied with grim satisfaction. The truth was that humanity's greatest contribution to the galactic war effort hadn't been their weapons technology, it had been their approach to warfare itself. While other species had developed elegant solutions to military problems, humans had developed systematic, scalable, and utterly ruthless approaches to organized violence. The difference was becoming apparent in every aspect of the conflict. Council species had traditionally fought wars as extensions of diplomacy, with clear objectives, defined victory conditions, and respect for civilian populations. Their conflicts were often more like elaborate duels than total wars. Humanity fought wars to win, by any means necessary. Intelligence update, called Lieutenant Colonel Park, the Korean-American officer who had become the Alliance's foremost expert on Void Hunter psychology. We've completed analysis of the captured control nodes from the last 3 engagements. The intelligence picture that emerged was disturbing. The Void Hunters weren't just an alien species, they were the evolutionary endpoint of a civilization that had consumed its entire galaxy before moving on to hunt in the dark spaces between stars. They had encountered and absorbed thousands of advanced species over millions of years, incorporating the best aspects of each civilization's technology while discarding the weaknesses. They're a composite intelligence, Park explained as he displayed the analysis results. Each Void Hunter entity is actually a collective consciousness formed from the absorbed minds of every species they've conquered. They know every advanced military technique, every sophisticated defensive strategy, every elegant solution that galactic civilizations have ever developed. But they don't know how to fight dirty, Admiral Martinez concluded. Exactly. They've absorbed the knowledge of civilized species that fought civilized wars. They understand honor, strategy, and technological superiority. What they don't understand is spite, stubbornness, and the willingness to bite your enemy's throat even when you're dying. General Chen nodded slowly. Which is why our primitive approach is working. We're not fighting the way they expect civilized beings to fight. The conversation was interrupted by urgent alarms throughout the command center. Long-range sensors had detected a massive Void Hunter force approaching the base, not the small raiding groups that had been harassing Council shipping, but what appeared to be their main battle fleet. Estimated enemy strength? General Chen asked as the tactical staff began updating the displays. At least 50 capital ships, plus support vessels, reported the sensor operator. They're moving in a coordinated formation, not the scattered approach they've been using for the raids. Admiral Martinez studied the enemy formation with the eye of someone who had spent decades learning to read the intentions of hostile forces. They're done playing games. This is a decisive engagement, they're betting everything on overwhelming us with their main force. The next few hours were a frenzy of preparation as the Council's defensive forces prepared for what would likely be the largest space battle in galactic history. The Alliance fleet, commanded jointly by human officers and Council military leaders, took defensive positions around Forward Base Olympus. The human contingent had grown significantly since the early days of the war. Earth's industrial capacity, primitive by galactic standards but scaled for total warfare, had been producing ships and weapons at a pace that amazed their sophisticated allies. The vessels were crude but effective, heavily armored, simply constructed, and armed with kinetic weapons that could be manufactured quickly and in large quantities. Remember the doctrine, General Chen broadcast to the fleet commanders as the enemy force approached weapons range. The Void Hunters expect us to engage at maximum range with sophisticated weapons. Instead, we're going to close to knife fighting distance and use simple, overwhelming firepower. The Void Hunter fleet moved with the predatory grace that had terrified galactic civilizations for eons. Their ships were works of malevolent art, reality-distorting constructs that seemed to exist partially outside normal spacetime. As they approached the Council defensive line, they began their standard attack pattern, reality manipulation designed to disrupt advanced technology and confuse sophisticated targeting systems. The human response was characteristically direct. All ships, Admiral Martinez ordered, full acceleration toward the enemy fleet. Close to minimum engagement range and open fire with everything we have. The sight of the Council fleet charging directly toward the Void Hunters would have been suicidal under normal circumstances. The enemy's reality manipulation abilities should have torn the attacking ships apart long before they could bring their weapons to bear. Instead, the human-led ships flew straight through the distortion fields with minimal effect. Their simple technology was too basic to be significantly affected by attacks designed to disrupt sophisticated systems. Chemical rockets continued to burn regardless of local spacetime curvature, and kinetic weapons fired according to basic physics that remained constant even in altered reality. The first exchange of fire occurred at ranges that galactic military doctrine would have considered knife-fighting distance. Human ships opened up with every kinetic weapon they could bring to bear, railguns, missile launchers, and even simple chemical cannons that fired explosive shells. The Void Hunter response was immediate and devastating, or should have been. Their reality manipulation attacks created gravity wells, dimensional rifts, and probability storms that should have crushed any attacking force. But the Council fleet kept coming. Valerian ships, their crews trained in human-style aggressive tactics, continued firing even as their hulls were stressed by gravitational anomalies. Thylaurian consciousness entities possessed simple mechanical systems, abandoning their sophisticated quantum manipulation in favor of basic ballistic calculations. Corthan vessels reshaped their hulls into crude but effective ram configurations, turning their matter manipulation abilities toward pure physical impact. The battle devolved into exactly the kind of primitive, brutal confrontation that the Void Hunters were unprepared for. Instead of elegant technological warfare, it became a simple question of which side could absorb more damage while continuing to fight. General Chen watched from the command center as her carefully planned strategy unfolded across the battlefield. The Council forces were taking heavy casualties, but they were giving better than they received. Every Void Hunter ship that fell took with it eons of accumulated knowledge and power, losses that the enemy couldn't easily replace. "Ma'am," reported Commander Rodriguez, "we're receiving surrender requests from 3 Void Hunter vessels." The statement was so unexpected that it took several seconds for its implications to sink in. The Void Hunters, who had never shown any interest in communication or negotiation, were actually attempting to surrender. "Patch me through to the lead vessel," General Chen ordered. The communication that followed was unlike anything in recorded galactic history. The Void Hunter entity that responded was a composite consciousness formed from hundreds of absorbed civilizations, and its voice carried the weight of eons of accumulated experience. "Human Commander," the alien presence spoke through the translation systems, "we acknowledge your victory. Your species fights in ways we do not understand, using strategies we cannot predict. We request terms for cessation of hostilities." General Chen considered her response carefully. Everything she had learned about the Void Hunters suggested that they were implacable predators who had never shown mercy to their victims. But now they were asking for mercy from the species they had dismissed as primitive savages. "What assurance do we have that you won't simply resume hostilities once you've rebuilt your forces?" she asked. "None," the entity replied with startling honesty. "We are predators by nature and evolution. We consume civilizations because that is what we were designed to do. But we are also rational beings who learn from experience. Your species has taught us that there are forms of warfare we do not understand and cannot predict." The Admiral joined the communication channel. "So what are you proposing?" "Withdrawal," the Void Hunter consciousness replied. "We will return to the dark spaces between galaxies and seek prey elsewhere. Your galaxy has proven to contain species that fight in ways we cannot counter." It was not the total victory that General Chen had hoped for, but it was something that no galactic civilization had ever achieved. The Void Hunters were retreating voluntarily. "We need guarantees," she said. "Monitoring systems, periodic check-ins, something to ensure you don't just wait a few centuries and try again." "Acceptable," the entity agreed. "We will establish communication protocols and allow monitoring stations in the intergalactic void. In exchange, we request safe passage for our withdrawal and the return of our surviving vessels." The negotiations that followed were complex and unprecedented. The Galactic Council found itself in the unique position of dictating terms to beings that had terrorized the galaxy for eons. The humans, who had been dismissed as primitives just months earlier, were now the primary architects of galactic security policy. In the end, the agreement was simple: the Void Hunters would withdraw beyond the galactic rim and would not return for a period of at least 10,000 years. Monitoring stations would be established to verify compliance, and regular communication protocols would ensure that the entities didn't simply disappear and plan another assault. As the surviving Void Hunter ships began their withdrawal, General Chen stood once again on the observation deck of Forward Base Olympus. The battlefield was littered with the wreckage of both fleets, but the outcome was clear: the most advanced military alliance in galactic history had successfully defended itself against an enemy that had consumed entire galaxies. "Think they'll be back?" Admiral Martinez asked as they watched the alien ships disappear into the darkness between stars. "Eventually," General Chen replied. "But probably not in our lifetimes, or our children's lifetimes. And, by then, maybe the Council will have learned enough about real warfare to handle them without our help. Or maybe," the Admiral suggested, "they'll have learned that sometimes the best solution to a sophisticated problem is a simple approach applied with overwhelming determination." The months that followed saw humanity's complete integration into the Galactic Council, not as junior members seeking approval, but as equal partners whose expertise was recognized as essential to galactic security. Earth's military academies began training officers from species that had mastered faster-than-light travel before humans had learned to use fire. Human tactical doctrine became required study for naval officers throughout Council space. The greatest irony, General Chen often reflected, was that humanity had saved the galaxy not by becoming more advanced, but by remaining primitive. While other species had evolved beyond the need for simple violence, humans had retained their capacity for basic, brutal, and utterly effective warfare. In the end, the galaxy had been saved by beings who still knew how to throw rocks, and throw them hard enough to matter. The final entry in General Chen's personal log, recorded as she prepared to return to Earth for the first time since the war began, captured the essence of humanity's transformation from galactic outcasts to indispensable allies. They mocked our primitive weapons and backward tactics. They laughed at our chemical rockets and kinetic projectiles. They dismissed us as savages playing with museum pieces. Right up until the moment we proved that sometimes, the old ways work because they're too simple to fail, too basic to counter, and too human to predict. We didn't save the galaxy by becoming more like them. We saved it by remaining exactly what we were, stubborn, violent, and too stupid to know when we were outmatched. And, sometimes, that's exactly what the universe needs.